speaker has a long drive ahead. He is Mr. Randy Bishop, going to talk about the battlefields of Tennessee, and he has books and things for sale. If you'd like to get something after he speaks, that'd be fine. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate y'all altering your schedule, and I am honored to be here tonight. I bring greetings from the tip of Tiger, Sons of Confederate Veterans Camp in Ripley, Mississippi, but I stress I do not live in Mississippi. I live in a little town called Middleton, Tennessee. If you were to take Corinth, Mississippi, and Shiloh and try to form a triangle, we would make a pretty nice little triangle. We typically do our Walmart shopping in Corinth, Mississippi, and we are roughly halfway between Collierville, Tennessee, and Shiloh. If any of you are familiar with West Tennessee, you know approximately where we're talking right now. On the back table back there we have 6 books, 5 of which I have written and 1 for which I wrote the foreword. And I would like to at least hit the high points of all those if it's acceptable tonight, to let you know basically what's going on. As far as credentials, I am a high school and junior college history teacher, and I also teach high school marketing. And in 2012, we received the Ragland Award for the person in the state of Tennessee who is deemed most responsible for helping preserve Civil War battlefields. And approximately 6 weeks ago received a literary award, the S.A. Cunningham Award from the Sons of Confederate Veterans Arkansas Division. So I hope that that gives some credibility to what we'll be saying tonight. I'll say just kind of like to try to hit the highlights of these books, and we'll be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have. But the first book we'll be talking about tonight actually will be the one on the far left, which is the Tennessee Brigade. This will be Archer's Tennessee Brigade. And go back with me in your minds, if you will, to approximately 2001. And we were on a family trip to Gettysburg, our first trip to Gettysburg. And for a Father's Day present, Sharon hired one of those tour guides to ride around with us and tell us everything that he knew about Gettysburg. And again, if you've been there, I think most of us will agree that's one of the great ways to kind of get indoctrinated to what goes on or what went on at Gettysburg. And while there, he looked at me and he said, "So tell me again where you guys are from." And I said, "We're from Tennessee." And he said, "Oh, you guys started this battle." I had never heard of Archer's Tennessee Brigade until that time. And that's all it seemed to take to just get this guy who had been absorbed with history for most of his life interested in starting to write about it. And we started to study, found out that Archer's Tennessee Brigade was actually formed before Tennessee seceded. We also found out that the first Confederate casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg were members of Archer's Tennessee Brigade, and that they were in the middle of the Confederate line advancing on July the 3rd of 1863. And so it could have very well been called Archer's Charge, but we all know that of course it was called Pickett's Charge because of the fact you had a Virginia newspaper man there that day, and of course wanted to give glory to his home state, as most of us I'm sure would want to do. So that's the group we're going to talk about briefly, and then we'll move into the other books which are primarily preservation oriented. And again, stop me at any time and ask questions. I'm used to talking to high school kids, so if I start, I guess you say, getting off task or whatever, please let me know. But one of the gentlemen we talk about, obviously in the book The Tennessee Brigade, is James J. Archer. He was a Marylander by birth. And actually when the Civil War started, he was in the Oregon Territory, resigned his commission from the U.S. Army, and made his way back to Texas, where he, for a short period of time, fought under Hood. He would be the Brigadier General of the Tennessee Brigade when it would reach its epitome of glory, if you will, but he would be captured on July the 1st of 1863 at Gettysburg, hiding in the rock quarry. If any of you are familiar with where Reynolds was killed at Gettysburg, again, if you've been there, you know approximate area we're talking about, but by Willoughby Run. Also, discuss a man by the name of Peter Turney, who stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, and that was pretty uncommon for most men. And he actually was from Winchester, Tennessee, the the county seat of Franklin County. And many of you know also, not being too far from there, that they actually adopted an ordinance of secession and tried to secede from Tennessee. Just give you a little bit of Tennessee history in case you didn't know that. There's no written proof that that was ever actually rescinded. So as far as you want to get legitimate about it, Franklin County is technically not part of Tennessee anymore. But Peter Turney himself was wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Some of the stories, eyewitness accounts of the time, say something to the fact that he stood on top of the fence and yelled something to the effect of, "Follow me, hog drivers," and bullets began to pierce his upper body, one of which went through his mouth, knocked out some of his teeth, a portion of his tongue, and lodged near his jugular vein. He was given up for dead, but this man managed somehow to survive that serious wound, made it home to Winchester, Tennessee, where his mother-in-law, and I will be nice because my mother-in-law is here tonight with me tonight, not his wife, not his mama, but his mother-in-law took a butcher's knife, heated it up, and dug the fragments of that bullet out of his neck. He survived and, of course, served 2 terms as governor of the state of Tennessee. Robert Hatton from Lebanon, Tennessee, one of the leaders initially of the 7th Tennessee, but he would also become Brigadier General of the Tennessee Brigade. He had a premonition about his death, and just before the Battle of Seven Pines, he wrote a letter to his wife, he wrote another to his mother, and one to his father, basically expressing his love to each one of them and to share the love they had exhibited toward him to other family members. And then on that first day of the Battle of Seven Pines, he was killed. Archibald Devo Norris, again from Lebanon, Tennessee, was sent up north to be educated, but the interesting thing about him is he gives more documentation of the early days of the Tennessee Brigade than any individual I personally have been able to find out anything about. But he considers himself a coward for this reason. On July the 3rd of 1863, when the Tennessee Brigade, along with many other Confederate troops, had made it to the high tide of the Confederacy, as we so call it, he found that his flag was the only one from the brigade still on the staff. So he tore the flag of the 7th Tennessee from the staff, stuffed it in his shirt, and ran back to the Confederate lines. Those who were captured considered him a hero because he had saved the colors for the day, but he said he was a coward, somewhat ashamed of his military antics, if you will, for the rest of his life. However, he would eventually become a Mason, state senator, served both in the Senate and the House, as county surveyor for Wilson County, and became superintendent of public instruction as well. There are some others that we try to hit in there, and I want to mention some of their names as we move on. Jesse Hutchins, I found this quite interesting. He enlisted the day after Fort Sumter, April of 1861. Never missed a roll call. Participated in every battle that the Tennessee Brigade participated in. By the way, they're in the Army of Northern Virginia, Eastern Theater, so we're talking some major battles. When you mentioned the Wilderness earlier, yes, these guys were there. Yes, they were at Chancellorsville. Every battle that the Army of Northern Virginia is in, they're there. But Jesse Hutchins, though, on April the 8th of 1865, and we all know what happened April 9th of 1865, April the 8th of 1865, in a skirmish at Appomattox, he was mortally wounded and died. If you stand at his grave, you can literally put your head on his headstone and look across the valley, and there you can see the McLean House and the courthouse and the rest of Appomattox Village. Stories like that, to me, I find somewhat interesting. Robert Shackelford, whose father was president of Cumberland University in Lebanon, Tennessee, told his son he'd rather him not join the military, but if he did, be willing to die for the cause that he said he believed so strongly in. And on July the 3rd of 1863, Private Shackelford was killed, and his body lies today in an unmarked grave somewhere in Gettysburg. Stories like that, to me, I think are somewhat interesting. There's another story, for example, of a man by the name of Lieutenant William H. Williamson, a name that probably most of us have never heard. Lost his right arm at Gettysburg. His best friend, standing beside him, lost his left arm. Each fall, they would buy a pair of gloves. One would take the other glove, and the other would take the other. So again, like I say, to me, stories like that are somewhat interesting. These men, by the way, their final brigadier general was a man by the name of William McComb, who was a native Pennsylvanian, came to Clarksville, Tennessee, and fell in love with a Tennessee girl. I fell in love in Clarksville, Tennessee as well, Sharon, back many years ago. So like I say, to make a long story short, he said, a more intelligent or braver group of soldiers the sun has never shone upon. Thank you, sir. And if any of you are interested, like I say, in that, I'll be glad to tell you more about the Tennessee Brigade, but I will tell you this one before any of you eat. Ben's favorite story, that's my younger son who is in the back, involves a man by the name of Robert Crouch from Morristown, Tennessee. If any of you received the Civil War Courier, that's where it's printed. And Robert Crouch was captured on July the 3rd of 1863 as well, and ended up at Johnson's Island. And at Johnson's Island in the winter of 1863-1864, he and his fellow POWs conducted what they called the Great Rat Hunt. They captured an estimated 500 plus rats. Sorry, ma'am. They also bribed some guards for flour. And that night, they baked rat pot pies. And he said the next morning, there was not a crumb to be found. Now, if you think about that, you think about many of these men who spend many years away from home. To me, Those sacrifices are tremendous. And I think that's one of the things I said when we look for as Sons of Confederate Veterans are what some of our ancestors did. Now, my ancestor, and the way that I got into Sons of Confederate Veterans, was captured at Franklin, not the Battle of Franklin, but a skirmish, if you will, in Franklin, and was told to march back to LaGrange, Tennessee, which he did, and he was in the Army maybe 7 months. So, you know, I say as far as glory, I don't guess we could say there was any true for him, but then again, it's how I got to be part of this organization. We changed the next few books, and when we were gathering information, I say we because we make it somewhat of a family trip. Usually my wife and one or both of my sons are with us. Tonight, I say we're honored also to have my in-laws with me as well. But when we were trying to gather information for the Tennessee Brigade, and you would go to Peter Turney's home site, for example, where Wolf Craig was, and it was hard to even tell exactly where the house stood. And I started thinking about battles in the state of Tennessee, and how many of those battlefields were by and large gone. And I know we were talking a few minutes ago, we made our first trip ever to Chickamauga today. In my opinion, one of the best battlefields I've ever visited. Really enjoyed it. But there are some that you will visit in Georgia and Tennessee and Mississippi, Kentucky, and other states that are not as well preserved. My second book that I published is entitled Tennessee Civil War Battlefields, A Guide to Their History and Preservation. And that's the one that we will talk about more so than any of the others tonight, and we will do the same briefly for Kentucky as well as for Mississippi, because it's the same type format there. And then we'll finish up tonight with Civil War Generals of Tennessee, where we looked at all the generals from Tennessee, north and south. But very quickly, most of you know that in the state of Tennessee there were over 38 battles that were deemed as principal events that had some significant impact on the outcome of the war. There were over 1,000 battles of various sizes within Tennessee's borders, but 38 were deemed pretty darn significant. If you look at overall military sites, from what I understand from Fred Prouty, who is over the Tennessee Wars Commission, there are actually more military sites in Tennessee than there are in Virginia. But of course, Virginia does have more battles. They have us on that one, but we have done pretty well. I conducted a chronological view of all of these and told what you would encounter when you see the battlefields today. There are period and modern photographs. Each one of the books have over 100 photographs. The maps are by Dave Roth of Blue and Gray Magazine. If any of you have that publication, he does a great job on his maps, and that's basically the format of the books. We start, for example, with Fort Henry. First major battle in the state of Tennessee. But most of you know, if you've been to Fort Henry's battle site, most of it's now underwater. And the main thing you will see are graves from 5 men who were killed when a Columbia cannon blew up during the early stages of the siege. Of course, we move from there to Fort Donelson. Fort Donelson, among one of the many treasures that it has in its visitor center, is a flag of 14th Tennessee Company C, men who had left the Tennessee Brigade and had come back to Dover, Tennessee on a recruiting trip. And while there, the Battle of Fort Donelson took place, and those men were captured. And so, of course, their company flag is at Fort Donelson today. But Fort Donelson, in my opinion, and I know it's not worth much, but I'll just tell you this, the younger generation that I teach, many of you are exposed to as well, they want all the bells and whistles. They want the buttons that you push and this lights up or this soldier goes into some type of animation and talks to him or her. Fort Donelson, by and large, seems to be a pretty dated battlefield as far as the visitor center. Shiloh to some degree too. Speaking of Shiloh, we'll look at that. April 6th and 7th, 1862, largest battlefield, or excuse me, the largest battle in the state of Tennessee. But you know, if you go to Shiloh today, and I'm sure most, if not all of you have been there, it's not encroachment, it's not urbanization. What has hurt Shiloh a lot through the years has been the Tennessee River, eating away at the riverbanks, eating away at Native American burial grounds. And it was atop one of those Native American burial grounds where a Confederate officer by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest stood on April the 6th of 1862 and saw Union reinforcements coming in. He does what every good lower level officer is going to do. He reports it to his superiors. And he's told basically to be quiet. I don't think after that night any man told Forrest to be quiet. Also, Island number 10, April the 7th of 1862, horrible condition of preservation. Poorly interpreted. In fact, if any of you go to Island number 10, you will see a sign that rests at the junction of 3 highways. How they did this, I have no idea. The letters are raised, but if many of you are like I am and you need these to be able to read what's on the sign, the background is supposed to be, I believe, gray, and the raised letters are supposed to be red, but it's all gray. If you go and you visit the grave sites of some of the men who died during the early stages of preparing for battle, you'll find that headstones are tousled this way and that way, and a wrought iron fence that once surrounded them is also lying on the ground. Horrible condition. Then we get to Britton Lane, Jackson, Tennessee, September of 1862. Pretty decently preserved site, nicely interpreted. The problem is, when a monument was erected there in the 1890s, some of the veterans of the battle showed up and they said, this is not where we fought. And so even though it's interpreted and there's a period correct cabin built there, it's not on the actual battlefield. But, you know, the intentions are good there. Davis Bridge, October the 5th of 1862. That's in my neck of the woods. Probably never heard of that. But after the Confederates were annihilated at Corinth on October 3rd and 4th of 1862, they began their retreat. Union soldiers came down from Bolivar, Tennessee, and met them at one of the few viable crossings of the Hatchie River, which today is a pretty wide ditch. Back then it was a navigable river. But Davis Bridge was actually contended by the Union soldiers to try to keep the Confederates bottlenecked while the rest of the Union Army came in behind them. Then, of course, from Corinth, and they would have Van Dorn's army basically trapped. Didn't quite work out that way. In fact, Union General E.O.C. Ord refers to Davis Bridge as that miserable bridge. It might be for the fact that he received a foot wound. It might be the fact that he takes out his sword and is about to whip one of his subordinates with the broadside of the sword, and the men who were under the command of that subordinate officer lowered their guns, pointed them at him. And of course he backed off. Whatever you said, that's fine then, okay? We need tourism dollars in Hardin County. And Davis Bridge is near the town. What was Metamora, today we know it is Pocahontas, Tennessee. We have an elevator factory, we have a couple of prisons, but by and large, we don't have a lot of tourism dollars to come in. And one of our major industries in Hardin County today, unfortunately, is crystal meth. And I don't know how things are here in Chattanooga, but we need something to help us out in Hardin County. Salem Cemetery in Jackson, Tennessee. Now, even though a small portion of that battlefield where Forrest actually found himself in an ambush is preserved, most of the land that's associated with the battlefield is in private hands of a man who has served as a Madison County historian. One of my favorite stories dealing with Salem Cemetery, though, if you see the headstones at Salem Cemetery, some of them have pock marks. And one of those headstones that has heavy pock marks from the bullets belongs to a man by the name of Adam Huntsman, who ran for congressman in the mid-1830s and defeated a man by the name of Davy Crockett. And of course, Davy Crockett stood on the courthouse lawn at Jackson, Tennessee, and he told the people basically where they could go, because he said, I'm going to Texas. And unfortunately, we know what happened to Davy Crockett. Just down the road from Jackson, you have the Battle of Parker's Crossroads. And I have the shirt on tonight, in my opinion, one of the best battlefields in the state of Tennessee. And when you receive the Ragland Award, the Tennessee Civil War Preservation Association gives you a $500 check that you were basically the deliverer of. You were not the owner of. And they asked me what battlefield I wanted to receive the $500. I selected Parker's Crossroads. But if you're cruising down I-40, I-40 cuts Parker's Crossroads battlefield in half. But State Senator Steve McDaniel says that's a two-edged sword because it brings all kinds of traffic into the area, obviously. Dad looks over here, he sees cannon, battlefield. The kids look over here and they see McDonald's. Mom realizes she's trapped. And so the whole family stops and spends some tourism dollars there at Parker's Crossroads. If you're not familiar with the story there, it was there in late December of 1862 where Forrest found himself surrounded as he was processing some recent Union captives. And one of his men rode up to him and said, General, they have us surrounded, what should we do? And he allegedly said, charge them both ways. And I say, since this is the Forrest camp, we got to tell that story. Murfreesboro, Chattanooga, you guys and ladies are far more familiar with those two battlefields than I am, but I think we all agree there's a lot that can be done as far as preservation and certainly interpretation. And I know we drove up to Point Park today, and you know, a lot of the markers that are there, it's hard to read them. They're difficult to pull over and negotiate what's on those without being run over. And I think that's sad. Murfreesboro, well, that's the same way. Spring Hill, Thompson Station, Fort Pillow, Nathan Bedford Forest State Park, a lot of those have a lot that can be done. But probably nowhere, though, in the state of Tennessee is the lack of preservation as noticeable as in Franklin, Tennessee. where on November the 30th, 1864, Hood, for all practical purposes, lost it with the Army of Tennessee. The day after the battle, a Union soldier walked in front of the Carter House, ground zero for the battle. You gotta stay between the flags, they told me this, okay? He said the blood flowed so deeply in the ditch in front of the Carter House that it went to the top of his shoes. And behind the Carter House, a mass Confederate grave was being prepared. One Confederate officer from Alabama, a colonel if I remember correctly, had been placed into the grave, and one of the men in his command was trying to bid him a fond farewell. Some say maybe even still a wedding ring, but he detected a faint pulse. And that man was pulled from beneath dead bodies and was nursed back to health. Now, guys and ladies, we can talk about this from a spiritual perspective. We can talk about it, how it affects society overall. But 19 years later, that Alabama colonel had a daughter, and her name was Helen Keller. Now, where would the civil rights of special needs individuals be if that Alabama colonel had been left there? Where will the battlefields and battlefield interpretation, visitation be for all of us in our future if we don't get active? And Fred Prouty, again, I will use his name, said that apathy, certainly the price of real estate, are two of the major factors we have to fight. And I know our SCV camp has spent years trying to raise money for a Mississippi monument. I can imagine what a tremendous effort it would be when you start trying to talk about buying battlefield land in an area like Chattanooga. It would be overwhelming. If you had told me when I was the age of either of my sons that the state of Tennessee, what was then the Civil War Preservation Trust, would have bought almost $2 million worth of land from Miller Lumber Company in Jackson to help set aside Davis Bridge Battlefield, I would have never believed it. And to think that what was then the John Milton Hubbard camp in Bolivar, which I was a member of before Sharon and I even got married, bought the first 5 acres for, if I remember correctly, it was a little over $200 an acre. And that's what land has done even in Hardin County. I can't imagine what it would be like here in an urban setting. But speaking of battlefields, it's not all just Tennessee with these mixed reviews. We'll look at Mississippi. Mississippi, most of you know, became the 20th state, 1817. Mississippi also was the 2nd state to secede. According to the Civil War Sites Assessment Commission, there were 14 battlefields in Mississippi that had a significant impact on the outcome of the war. We'll look at a few of those briefly. The siege and the Battle of Corinth. The largest intact earthworks in the United States today are in Corinth, Mississippi. And many people in our town, 30 minutes away, don't have a clue that those exist. If you go to Corinth, Mississippi today and you look for the Tishomingo Hotel, which was where the hot stuff was taking place October 3rd and 4th, you're not going to find it. You'll find a sign where it was. If you go to the site of Corona College to see where many men were cared for medically and where many died in the days after the battle, you won't find it. You'll find a deteriorating sign. If you go to Battery Robinette, you will find a $12.5 million, 12,000 square foot state-of-the-art visitor center with all the bells and whistles like we talked about. And that's one of the most mixed reviews you will find is in Corinth, Mississippi. You want to see where some of the hottest action went on there or at Tupelo? Either one of them, you'll be standing in the middle of the Walmart parking lot. If you want to go to where Battery Phillips, site of some of the heaviest action the first day of the Battle of Corinth, you'll be standing in a private residence yard. If you go to where Battery Williams was located, you'll be standing in the private property of a distribution center not far from Coca-Cola Bottling Works in Corinth, Mississippi. So again, total mixed reviews if you go to Corinth, Mississippi. Also Iuka, most of you know Iuka, beautiful town to visit today, well-preserved antebellum homes. Unfortunately though, if you go to Iuka today also, you will be visiting a city that only 6 years ago was in the top 10 most endangered battlefields according to the Civil War Preservation Trust. And if you go to where the 11th Ohio Battery stood, you'll be staying in the parking lot of a motel that I dare say none of the men in here and none of the ladies want to spend the night in. Speaking of Corinth, Mississippi, Battery Robinette, show you how bloody it was there. The 69th Ohio occupants of Battery Robinette on October 4th, 1862, the victorious unit, 69% casualty rate, and they won the battle. Think about the bloodshed at Corinth, Mississippi. It's just amazing to me. Holly Springs. Holly Springs is not supposed to be on the list, but I cheated and put it in there because most of you know, of course, that's where Van Dorn raids Grant's supply base. He was gearing up for an advance toward Vicksburg. And of course, many people consider it a major battle during the American Civil War, but for some reason the Civil War Sites Assessment Commission didn't deem that possible. And of course we moved to Vicksburg. Many of us, and I was probably as guilty of this as anybody, when I was a younger guy I thought you had the siege of Vicksburg and that was it. But there are battles leading up to Vicksburg, and I'll mention a few of those and tell you what you'd find. For example, Fort Gibson, near the Schaefer House, where the first shots of the battle were fired. A marker denotes the historical significance of that site, and it says, here a heap of arms and legs were seen after the battle. A federal officer actually said the town was the most beautiful that he had ever seen. Several structures there are still visible, but the area itself, by and large, mixed results. Jackson, Mississippi, just like Nashville, the state capital, for some reason we failed to preserve a lot of the Civil War history in those areas. But Jackson, Mississippi, horribly preserved. Joseph Johnson simply sent a telegram and said, I'm too late. And many people say that any type of preservation efforts in Jackson, Mississippi would also be deemed too late. Raymond, Mississippi, May the 12th, 1863. Gentlemen, we need to take this to heart. A lady did more to help preserve Raymond, Mississippi's battlefield and has now set her eyes on preserving Champion Hill than any of the men in the area. Speaking of Champion Hill, you would think if you went to a place called Champion Hill, you would see a huge hill. Guess what? 1930, it was cut away for gravel operations, being Conservation Corps. It was at Champion Hill where Lloyd Tillman, Paducah, Kentucky resident, was killed while manning a Confederate cannon. It was there where 5 Smith brothers, reminiscent of the Sullivans from World War II, were also pretty well butchered. I will tell you what happened to them. One received a wound in the hand. All his fingers had to be amputated. Another was shot in the shoulder. A third was permanently disabled by a hip wound. The 2 more fortunate ones, if you will, were uninjured, but they spent the remainder of the war in Fort Delaware. But a lot has been done in the last 3 years to preserve Champion Hill, and I think by and large that's going to be another success story. Then we moved to Okolona, Mississippi, where Forrest, baby brother Jeffrey, was killed. And I'm assuming, since this is the Forrest camp, that many of you have been there. If you have been, you were probably somewhat disappointed, because you got there, and unless it's changed in the last 3 years, there was one historical marker. And from here to Mr. Myers, it looked like a jungle thicket, not just woods, but undergrowth and everything was so thick. Certainly some more interpretation can be done there. Bryce's Crossroads, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best preserved battlefields in the state of Mississippi. And it was there on June the 10th of 1864 that Nathan Bedford Forrest achieved one of the most lopsided victories, if arguably not the most lopsided victories in the entire war. And what's ironic, interesting about that, the National Park Service owns 1 acre of Bryce's Crossroads. The rest is owned by the city of Baldwin, Mississippi, and they have done an outstanding job of interpretation. They enlarged their visitor center there approximately a year and a half ago. There is a massive operation going on for their 150th anniversary here in a couple of weeks, and they feel like there, as well as the interpretation of Tupelo, which is now taking place there, because if any of you have been to Tupelo, you know, again, it's 1 acre owned by the National Park Service, and the rest of it there is a travesty. But Bryce's Crossroads has a lot of potential, and you can talk to a lady by the name of Edwina Carpenter, who's over their visitor center, and she'll tell you what an impact tourism dollars have there. And again, that was just a grassroots effort that started. Before I bore you to death, I move on to mention Kentucky's battlefields very quickly. Kentucky, of course, our 15th state. Kentucky has approximately 13 battles. I'll hit about 6 of those very quickly. For example, the first battle in Kentucky was Barberville. I'll just mention this very quickly. Great place to visit. Murals on the sides of the buildings. A period-correct bridge has been constructed. Again, like we talked about with Britton Lane, most people don't think it's in the right spot. When they've done some metal detecting in the area, they haven't found any relics in that area, but they have about a mile down the road. Sacramento, December 28, 1861. That was the first major battle of a man by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who said, and I quote, "I met a young, beautiful Kentucky belle who rode up to him and told him that Union soldiers were nearby. He took her advice, of course achieved a victory there, and Sacramento is a small town that has taken its place in history and has certainly capitalized on it. Well-preserved battlefield, well-interpreted. The only problem that I see in that area, if you visit some of the markers, you may have to park across the street at a Dollar General store to walk across and read them. But by and large, again, I say if you're a Forrest fan, great place to visit. Middle Creek, January the 10th of 1862. There, a young federal colonel by the name of James Garfield achieved a major victory. And of course, a couple months later, he would be promoted to Brigadier General. 19 years later, he would be President of the United States. But there are some major battles in the state of Kentucky. Richmond. Now, Richmond in August of 1862, I'll say a lot of time passed there, a Confederate colonel by the name of Benjamin Hill said of this battle, "The deadliest fire was poured into our ranks, but we did not falter." In fact, at that battlefield, and listen to these statistics, guys, ladies, if you will, Federal casualties, 225 killed, 1,073 wounded, 4,000 captured, and the Confederate casualties total just over 100. The good part, but the bad part about Richmond is this. Most of the land is preserved, however, it's on an Army base. But each year they have a major reenactment. The desire is there. They have an extremely active preservation society, historical group, and so on. And again, they're proof that it can be done. And of course, most of us are familiar with Perryville. And Perryville, to me, reminds me so much of Franklin. Because if any of you have been to Perryville, you're aware of the fact that a local farmer began to round up the Confederate dead and to bury them. One of the first preservation efforts, if you will, in that area. Perryville, over 350 Confederates buried in that one cemetery, 750 acres in the park, well interpreted. The only bad part that I personally saw about Perryville, it's a pretty tough walk. And those hills are hard to negotiate. And so be prepared if you go there. And Paducah, Kentucky, if we're talking about Forrest and we're at the Forrest camp, we've got to mention Paducah, Kentucky, March 25th of 1864. One of Forrest's men wrote, "The enemy opened on us with a most terrible volley." It's not well preserved. In fact, the objective of his battle is now occupied by an unoccupied community center, civic center actually, to be more specific, where his headquarters were located. What was then described as a grove of trees is now in front of an abandoned schoolhouse. So Paducah has a lot that can be done there as well. So as it can be seen with Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi, I think we certainly have a mixed result of preservation efforts. The last two that I want to mention, the one on the end is a book entitled Rebels' Recollections. It is a republication of a book from the 1870s. I did write the foreword to it. That man actually was an artilleryman by the last name of Edgleston, served under Stonewall Jackson. And I know we mentioned Stonewall Jackson earlier. Not a lot of battle narrative in his book, more behind the scenes. This is what camp life is like. This is my impression of this military commander. This is my impression of this civilian leader. But like I say, you won't get into the military narrative. And I don't sit there and talk about specific troop movements either. I conduct an overview of the battle. I figure there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And that's been done by so many people who are far more capable of doing that than I would be. But the last one I want to mention, there were 61 men from Tennessee who served as general, various ranks, general, on either side during the American Civil War. And I tried and set out, and I thought, I'm just going to talk about the ones who were involved with Confederacy. Well, then I ran into men like Paul Houghton Carter. I decided, no, we need to go ahead and talk about some of those. But just very quickly to mention a few, Mark Lowry. Now, Mark Lowry, I realize, achieved most of his glory in Mississippi. But I'll tell you this also, Mark Lowry had some strong ties to Tennessee. In fact, earlier tonight somebody mentioned McNairy County. He was actually born in McNairy County. Served in Mississippi, illiterate until approximately 20 years of age. Marries, is taught how to read by his wife, becomes a preacher. Later will found what we know today as First Baptist Corinth, Mississippi. He will also be the founder of Blue Mountain Bible College in Blue Mountain, Mississippi. And approximately 15 years after the war, he ends up in my hometown of Middleton, Tennessee, at the train station, where he's going to take some students from Blue Mountain on a field trip. While he's there, he looks at one of his students, he falls back against the wall of the depot, hits the ground, dead of a massive heart attack. So he certainly had some strong Tennessee ties. Just to mention a few who we talk about, and I'll mention last names. I'll say I don't want to bore y'all to death, and I will give plenty of time for questions. Gillum, Cooper, Farragut, Carter, William Campbell, Robert Johnson, and James Patton Brownlow. Just to mention a few of those a little more specifically, we mentioned Robert Hatton and William McComb earlier, but of course you've got William Bate, wounded in the head at Franklin, survived the war, served 2 terms as governor of the state of Tennessee. One of the things that he focused on was eliminating the state's debt. And I will reserve any comment. Wouldn't that be nice? In addition to being a state senator, his military experiences included a few pretty major battles. Shiloh, he was also wounded at Corinth, and he also fought at Nashville. He used his crutches to walk the remainder of his life, and he had to be helped onto his horse. He's buried in Nashville. Many of the men who are from Tennessee and fought in Tennessee are actually buried in Memphis at Elmwood Cemetery, which from what I understand, more Confederate generals are buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis than any other cemetery other than Hollywood in Richmond. Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's what they have told me at Forrest Camp in Memphis. And one of the gentlemen who's a member there is the curator of Elmwood, so I'm assuming he knows his stuff. Just to mention a couple of more, Hardeman County resident Richard Winkler Richardson, never heard of him, but he was known for his raiding techniques. And in 1864, Jefferson Davis actually revoked his promotion to brigadier general. After the war, he was associated with Forrest in his railroad endeavors. Something happened. In 1870, some questionable business dealings are going on, and Richardson walks out of an establishment, he's shot in the back of the head, and he's killed. Buried in Elmwood along with several of the others. Cadmus Walker Wilcox. Now, you talk about somebody who fights and then tries to help relieve the tension of post-war South. A boyhood transplant to Covington. Went to West Point. He listened to some of his classmates. McClellan, Stonewall Jackson again, John Adams, Sturgis, Pickett, Dabney Murray. Remained a bachelor his entire life. And in fact, when he passed away, he had 8 pallbearers. 4 of them were former Confederate generals, 4 of them were former Union generals. And he spent the remainder of his life trying to help people get over the tension of the war. And I say, there's so many times, so many of us are hard to forget almost anything, but I think we should probably follow his example in some aspects. Of course, Leonidas Pope, William Hicks Red Jackson, Bushrod Johnson, Matthew Fontaine Maury. We talk a lot about your infantrymen, but of course Maury is a Confederate naval officer, created navigational charts, books about nautical issues and so on, served as a professor at Virginia Military Institute, and he's buried at Richmond's Hollywood Cemetery near the graves of former Presidents Tyler and Monroe. Just to mention a couple more, Felix Zollicoffer. We were talking about Kentucky earlier, and I skipped over Mill Springs. Battle of Mill Springs is known by 11 names, supposedly a record among Civil War battles. And it was there where Zollicoffer, who was a political appointee as a general, nearsighted, ends up in the middle of a group of Union soldiers. And one of the guys with him says something to the effect of, "General, they're the enemy." He pulls his pistol up and starts to fire, but the first one to get shot is Zollicoffer, blown off of his horse. Zollicoffer, though, will die at Mill Springs near the Zolli tree, which many of you, I'm sure if you've been there, you're familiar with that site. A few years ago, the Zolli tree fell. And the Mill Springs Battlefield Association had the foresight to take that tree and to cut it up into paperweights that you can buy for $5, and all the proceeds go toward battlefield preservation. Me, I'd have probably said, "Oh no, we've lost the Zolli tree," and I'd had a dozer come in, or we'd have burned it or something, and everything would have been gone. But that amazed me. The last one I want to mention, because we've got men like Alfred Jefferson Bond, we've got men like A.P. Stewart and others, but Thomas Benton Smith, many of you are probably familiar with his name, one of the saddest stories of the American Civil War to me. While not mortally wounded, he did receive a serious wound. When he surrendered at Nashville, an Ohio colonel walked up to him and repeatedly struck him over the head with a sword, to the extent that Smith's skull actually cracked and his brains were exposed. He spent the next 59 years of his life in and out of an insane asylum in Nashville. One of the primary reasons that he would leave would be to go to reunions of his fellow comrades, his compatriots, those men who had served in the Confederate Army with him. Now, I leave you with that thought tonight, and I'll be glad to answer any and all questions, but I got to mention this guy's name as we close. Robert Charles Tyler. Birthplace, birth date, largely left to speculation. But think about what this man did. He lost a leg at Missionary Ridge, walked with crutches And in fact, on April the 16th of 1865, he climbed atop Fort Tyler, his namesake, standing there surveying the Union lines, and the Union sharpshooter shoots and kills General Tyler. As far as we know, he holds the distinction of being the last man from either side to die during the American Civil War. Tonight we've talked about a group of soldiers from Tennessee, we've talked about officers from Tennessee, we've talked about battlefields in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Mississippi. There's a lot of heritage that many of us have ties to in some, if not all of those. There's a lot to still be studied by a lot of people. I hope that tonight I have at least not totally bored you, but interested you to some degree of some of the facts and figures from some of those locations and some of those people. I will be glad to try to answer any questions, and I promise you, if I don't know the answer, I will say, I don't know the answer. I can't lie in front of my mother, I'm not going to get in trouble tonight. Okay? Oh, we'll tell y'all this too. Got to brag on her. My hero is with us tonight. I'm going to say it. My wife, this time last year, we didn't know if she was going to be here or not, and she has fought and defeated cancer, and so didn't do it, did I, Mom? I promise you. Anyhow, I said I will be glad to answer any and all questions. I will say I promise you if I don't know.
Randy,
yes,
as you travel around to the various battlefields and sites, what is your perception of the national park system's attitude towards our cause, I guess, versus the federals?
Okay, we're taping this. I'm going to be careful what I say, okay? I can just tell you that when you write about a battle in any state, you have to be sure and are certain to include a lot of what might typically be considered as politically correct sources. I will not mention the battlefield, but I will just tell you there is one in Tennessee. When I was trying to get my book into that area, they said that I had too many period sources that were of the pro-Confederate nature. And so what I did was, rather than cut those out, I added more official record documentation, if you will, and it got accepted. I hope I answered your question without getting myself in trouble. Did I do that all right on that one, Mom? Okay. But that's, I will just tell you this. We live in an area of the state of Hardeman County where it's not as controversial as it is, I know, even in Memphis. You know, if any of you have kept up with Memphis, there has been a major battle in Memphis, especially over your camp's namesake. And I don't know that that will stop. I think, personally, I feel like it will get stronger, not only in Memphis, but I think it will continue. And for myself, growing up in a small town and seeing what people felt about a war that existed several generations ago, I think it's sad for what's going to happen for those who will follow, say, in 50 years. I think it's sad. And I'll be honest,
our area where we live, we're sort of between a rock and a hard spot, so to speak, and up until just recently, we've had a real hard time getting any kind of publicity, good publicity or bad publicity. They just, push us in the corner and don't have anything to say about us. But that, I see a little crack in that brick wall there, and I think we're going to do a little bit better here in Chattanooga.
Our SCB camp, I'll say, even though I'm a Tennessee resident, we were members, Ben and I are in Ripley, Mississippi, which is not that far away from where we live. In fact, we're only 7 miles from the state line. But when they put up there, one of our members, camp members, is a retired tool and die man, and he made, the SCV emblem and everything, and they put it on the Welcome to Ripley, Mississippi sign, and it was stolen. He made another one, and they put a security camera, and there have been no attempts at theft, no attempts to deface it. But there again, as far as the heritage itself, I think it's going to be a battle. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Did spend some time in Tennessee. I can tell you the facts here. Just kind of like, yes, sir. Anything I have, I promise you, I will back it for you. And I do have several also that had Tennessee ties. And as soon as I First of all, he's buried in Nashville, which I think says what he thinks of Tennessee. But also,
He was headmaster of the school in Nashville.
yes, sir, that's true, by choice.
And he's coupled with the abolitionists.
Yes, sir, by choice. Knoxville, Richmond, Shiloh are among his battles. He was also wounded at Shiloh, chose to stay in Tennessee where he had shed his blood. Also, moving on here, there at Shiloh, he lost 120 of his men also. But yeah, by choice, he declared Tennessee his official residence and requested to be buried in Nashville. To me, that makes him a Tennessean. But I agree with you. It's kind of like William McComb. William McComb was born in Pennsylvania, but he married a Clarksville, Tennessee girl. That makes him a Tennessean.
26 Ohio men that worked at Beverly Hills.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'll tell you what, there are a lot of men who moved down from the north and lived here. I was, what did I read today? Who was mayor of Chattanooga today? I know we read it, we were over.
Wilder.
Yeah, and I was impressed with that. You know, there again, I think that shows some open-mindedness and attempts at reconciliation and everything. Yes, sir, you are right. All that's in my book. You must have snuck and read it. Yes, sir.
Just a comment. Have you been to Stone Mountain in Atlanta?
I have not been, no, sir.
Well, I lived in Atlanta for 10 years, and it's a beautiful place. And, you know, there's thousands of people go there every day. Well, I heard on the news, I guess it's been about a month ago, there's some groups now attacking Stone Mountain, Carbons is on the mountain. And I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when it's coming. But people visit there all the time and don't realize that whole park is a memorial to the Confederacy.
Yes, sir.
That big mall that runs down to the Carbons on the mountain, there's there's state flags and pavilions all the way down for every state of the Union. It tells when they seceded and when they came back in the Union. But people go there all the time and don't realize it's a memorial. So it took a long time for people to catch up, but it started to catch up. I don't know what's going to happen now.
Yes, sir. If you'll pause that for a second, I'll tell you something just briefly.
I want to kind of answer Herb's question as, I think he's going to answer it. I'm the regent for the Daughters of the Union, and we find it almost impossible to get any publicity or anything. Recognition, that's it, of it. So I think they're trying to keep both.
Because the war was so divisive, you think, or what?
I just think that, I don't know about anywhere else, but I think in Chattanooga, you know, there's just certain people they want to get publicity, and that's kind of.
Could very well be. Yes, ma'am, could be.
I am a reenactor as well as other things, and I know for a fact that you cannot do a reenactment in any of the parks. And this relates to Shiloh, to Franklin. You cannot do a living history approach other than as a federal unit. Now, most of the reenactors carry both uniforms. We have to carry out a reenactment. And I just came from the SAC. But luckily this time I got to do it as a Confederate. And luckily because mine is such a conflict. But in Atlanta in September, my unit is going to have to do better to balance out the units.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is. I'll say it's.
Park Service, you have to do better.
I guess that's how, looking around at Bryce's Crossroads here in the City of Baldwin. Seriously, if any of you want to see a great reenactment, I know it's a pretty good drive from here, but they got a great reenactment. But hot, my gracious, it's hot. Yes, sir, I apologize.
I think Stone Mountain, they're gonna want to sandblast that.
That'd be a tragedy.
Are there any battles in McNairy County?
The main thing in McNairy County, and it is horribly preserved, you have the Hearst Nation in Purdy, where Hearst had his base of operation, and of course the old home there, if it's even still standing, last time I saw it, was just horrible condition. But campsites, skirmishes, but no major battles, and even as close as that is to Shiloh and everything, you would think there would have been. Like I said, in Hardeman County we got Davis Bridge, but that's part of it. When you cross the river, you could say is in McNairy County. So Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How many of the men in your Tigers camp know where their ancestors buried?
Know where their ancestors buried?
Yes.
Oh, my gracious. I would have no clue to guess. I know where mine is, but I don't know how many.
I take care of a Confederate cemetery. It's up on I-75 in the way, Stillwell Confederate Cemetery. 155 unknown people. I have identified 38 of those people to today. Most of them in Mississippi and Alabama.
Well, I will share that, because we have over 100 members, but now if we have 28 come to the meeting.
If I go to the Sons of Confederate Veterans or to the UDC, either one, I've been to both of them, and ask how to find the men who are in these regiments, and I have to go, I've got 30,000 of these little cards from the military records to find these 38. How many of those people in these regiments are, like this camp is for Forrest, but if you go to some of the others, they're not, they're from the companies that were in the
Yes.
neighborhoods. And those companies and those regiments all have members that are in organizations like this, but there's no way to cross-reference where their ancestor is, who their ancestor is, first of all. The UDC won't tell you anything, they say everything is private, because the applications are so personal. And you understand that?
Yes.
But here I am looking for the records for these 155 men, and can't find anything.
I know we have.
We've got organizations like this that have men who are in this organization, or
And they don't know where they're
organizations like this, somewhere in this country, like people from Lochapoka, down in Alabama. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but it's just west of Talladega. Those people, some of those are in this cemetery.
I would like to say most, if not all of them, but that'd be a pure guess. I don't want to lie to you, but I really don't know. So mine is buried not far from my in-laws' house in a cemetery that's kind of like we were talking about Oklahoma, all
If they
overgrown and everything.
survived the war, most of them know. If they didn't survive the war, they don't have any idea for 90% of it.
I would be guessing.
And I think that there's ways that we could get the information from organizations like yours and this one, of where each of the members who sign up to be a member of this organization, where their ancestors buried, if they know.
Well, Tippin Tigers has a website. Camp Commander's Marty Hubbard.
I've been on it.
He could announce it next. I would like to think most of them, but I'm like you. I don't know. I better not say, because I don't want to. That'd be pure guess on my part.
I'm just saying that I think that there's more to be done than being done.
Yes, sir.
It's
Well, I
just
agree.
25 years to find these 38 men, by the way.
I know we've got a man in Hardin County by the name of Rex Brotherton who is trying to find basically everything he can about the men from Hardin County who served. Of course, some Union, most Confederate, but he's had a task behind him in trying to do that as well. So that's just one county. I can
Ron's
imagine.
getting into the South Mississippi, and his compatriots that work with him on that, and he has a website, Let We Forget, and it's very good too. I've been on every site, every organization that I can find that has a site that has people from Mississippi, Alabama, trying to find the rest of these guys.
Yes, sir.
But can't find them.
I wish I could tell you, like I said, I'd be pure guessing. I do want to thank Mr. Myers for asking me tonight. Like I say, we found out, when we were talking on the phone, we actually have some, not relatives, but he's actually been to the small town of Middleton, so, I appreciate y'all's attention. Like I said, I hope I did not bore y'all to death tonight, okay? Thank you.